Next up, we have Reverend Rhina Ramos. Reverend Rhina Ramos was born in El Salvador and grew up during the Civil War. She is an ordained United Church of Christ minister, leading an open and affirming Spanish-speaking congregation in Oakland, California since 2011. Reverend Rena is also a community organizer and has led programs and campaigns advocating for educational equity, labor rights, LGBTQ human rights, international solidarity with El Salvador, and domestic violence prevention. Reverend Rena Ramos, welcome.
Hi, everyone, and thank you for having me here. I joined the Zoom call at the time when Tori was talking, and then I heard Jose, and it's just a wonderful group of speakers that you have me join, and for that, I am very thankful. So I'll start talking a bit about what I do now, and then we'll talk about my journey to get to what I do now, because it's been a long journey to it. So what I do now, I have two hats. One is the one I got contacted by Erica through the work I do nationally for the United Church of Christ. And I do work of inclusion of LGBTQ community and Latinx UCC churches that haven't yet opened up their doors to the LGBTQ community and need, well, they need not just a little push, but they need to start somewhere to understand that it is our calling of living out love to embrace everyone. And that is the calling, and there is nothing else, and preaching hate is not what God wants. So that's my job at the national level. And also another piece of that job is that most of the UCC churches of the United Church of Christ churches along the United States are white, middle class, upper middle class, with a few sprinkled Latinos here and there. And so part of my job is to create inclusion and embracement too of Latinx in the white churches, in the wider UCC church, because also multicultural doesn't happen suddenly. You really have to work at it. You have to be intentional on how you create leadership so that those spaces feel inclusive. So that's the work I do with the UCC at a national level. And then at a local level, I lead a church, Spanish-speaking congregation that's very unique because it's open to the LGBT community, and we have the entire spectrum of, lesbian, gay, transgender, intersex, and plus, and non-binary among our ranks. And I started this church from zero in December 2011 and became ordained by the United Church of Christ to do this work. And first, I started it as a volunteer. I have worked in the nonprofit sector for more than 20 years, and I was supporting myself and doing the pastoral work on the side. But then when Trump got elected, I decided I was going to be a full-time minister because our community was getting beat up too much, and they needed support that I can provide as a pastor. So that's when in 2018, I became a full-time pastor and I started fundraising for my work as a pastor. But what got me here? I consider myself a Salvadorian, an immigrant, a lesbian, a mujer, a woman, a Latina, and a person of faith. And for me, the identity of being Salvadorian is important. I came to this country at age 14, already very conscious of who I was. And I left El Salvador during the 80s at the time of the Civil War. And I am a person who understands what it is to grow up in war times And so that is why I will always work for peace, because when you as a child had to be afraid of dying at a crossfire, be afraid of dying because of the bomb, it's not a way of having a childhood. And because I know this, and it's very imprinted in my story, I'm a person who will always work for demilitarization of our society, because we don't need that many guns. We don't need any of them. And we don't need tanks, and we don't need grenades, and we don't need to gas protesters. And so that's part of my growing up. And then the other part that marks my story is being an immigrant. When we were in El Salvador, my mother was able to get a tourist visa to leave El Salvador and went and joined my aunt in New York. And my mother decided she was going to stay, and my aunt and my mother decided they were going to send for us. But we didn't have a visa. So my aunt, who was able to travel back and forth with a green card, went to El Salvador, got herself a smuggler, a coyote, you call it. And we started traveling north, undocumented, and we crossed the border. And that is another part of the story that imprinted in me. I needed it to fight for justice, because it's very unjust to have to fear for your life just because you want to live in a safer place. And at the time, leaving the war, it was something everybody wanted to do. And so we were putting ourselves in safety by trying to live in El Salvador, and had to endure an entire month crossing Guatemala, Mexico, and then being put on a jail cell for a day while in Mexico, while I was a teenager, and all those things that I will always remember in my life have done for me the work of politicization and conscious building. And that is why I have dedicated my life to being an activist. Once we finally made it and crossed the border after two very hard attempts, because we were, you are chased by border patrol and had to hide, and you had to walk for hours, and finally made it through. And we were able to be reunited with my mother in New York. I decided I was going to start going to church because I had grown up Catholic, and because the trip had been so traumatic, and I had promised God that if we made it safely, I was going to become a good Catholic again, because I was skipping communion and all those things. And I had made this pact with God. If He help us to pass our day, because God is genderless, if they help us come safely to the United States, that I was going to be a good believer. And so I went to the local Catholic church in New York, and I told the priest, I said, I want to do all these things, because I have promised God that if we made it safely to the US, I was going to comply with all this. And then the priest didn't want to pay too much attention to me, dismissed me really quick. And by a random thing in life, we ended up living next to a Baptist church. And one day I spotted one of my teachers going to the Baptist church, and I asked her at the bilingual class, I said, oh, I saw you walking into the Baptist church near where I live. What's that place? What do you do there? And then she invited me, and she said, just come, 3 p.m. a Sunday. I walk into that church, and oh my God, I became a fundamentalist, born again Christian. It was a Latino church and an immigrant church, and it gave me a great sense of community. But what ended up happening is that I ended up repressing being a lesbian. And I hated myself for many years for being queer. And I didn't want to be who I was. And I prayed so hard. And I fasted for days. And I used to pray to God to kill me or to change me. And I also married in that church to a deacon, a man from El Salvador, too. And we were the perfect couple, and we were leaders in the church. But it was eating me up. I married at 19, trying to escape who I was. And then I started going to college. Then I started law school. My then husband was a very supportive man. And I will always say, I was very lucky to have somebody who believed I could become a lawyer, because that was my first career. I graduated in 95 in Long Island, New York, as an attorney, and I practiced labor law for 5 years. And but then my truth was eating me up, and there was a moment when I needed to come out of the closet, and it was no longer a way to live, because I was being consumed with this and having a life that it was not the life I wanted to live. And so finally, my then husband and I looked for a counselor who helped me get to terms with the fact that I was a lesbian, and that wasn't an evil spirit that I had in me, that I was not possessed, that I actually was just a normal person with a different orientation. And then at the end of a year of counseling, my then husband and I decided to divorce, and we had to announce this to the church. And the church pretty much decided I was not welcome anymore in there. And that was very sad, because I consider being a Christian part of my identity, because I grew up Catholic, and I grew up in a household with faith, and prayer was important. And then I became myself a person that was very devoted to the church. And so what did I do with that? I didn't want to take that from me. That was so much integral part of me, and put it away. But for many years, I didn't have a church. But then I wanted to pursue another degree of higher education, and somebody suggested I should go to seminary because faith was important to me. And I went and sat Union Theological Seminary, which is one of the oldest seminaries in the country, in New York. When I was still living in New York, I went and sat at a class, and they were talking about the idea of God and how it has changed after World War II. And I got so fascinated. I was so excited with the information that I decided, all right, this is what I'll do. I'll go to seminary, and I enrolled. And I got into Union, but then a job came along in California, and I decided to relocate. And I decided to enroll in a local seminary called the Pacific School of Religion in California, in Berkeley. And they gave me a full ride tuition to do a master in divinity. And I finished that in 2003. But I wasn't yet convinced I was going to become a pastor, because it had been imprinted in me. I wasn't a good person, and how can I be a pastor if I wasn't like a good example to people? And finally, after 5 years of discerning, after my graduation from seminary, I decided, yes, I was ready to become a pastor, but put on the track of ordination with the United Church of Christ, and that the calling that I had was to start this non-existent church that was going to not just be a home for me, but for so many people like me who wanted to express their faith freely and be embraced as an LGBTQI person. And that is when we started Ministerio Latino, that is now 8 years old and has the whole spectrum. We have done baptisms for transgender people who want to adopt a new name and be blessed in their expression and identity expression. And we have done those kind of rituals that are so life-giving to people. They have been wonderful. And during polls, which yesterday celebrated 4 years, the poll tragedy that happened in Orlando 4 years ago, I was sent by the United Church of Christ to do pastoral work to the families of those affected by this horrible massacre. And I was able to accompany those families and pray with them and emphasize that their loved one didn't deserve, that this wasn't God's will, that they didn't deserve to die in this way, that they were God's beloved children and that they were divine and perfect. And that was my message to those families I was able to accompany 4 years ago. And so my ministry is affirmed in that belief that we all created beautifully perfect and divine, and nothing is wrong with us, no matter who we are. And so that's what I've been doing. And as a response to COVID-19, many of the members of my church have lost jobs. Some of them are asylum seekers and recently arrived immigrants and still in the process of getting documentation. And some of them are just undocumented, and we have been able to secure money to provide rent and food money for 50 people. Just recently, we were able to do that in the month of June, and we are very happy we were able to do that. And something I'm gonna put here in the chat room is something that my national work has produced, and is toolkits on the work of inclusion for faith communities. In case you want to download them, they are free of charge. In case you want to teach them in your faith communities, I'm happy to consult and be of support to you on how to utilize those toolkits. So that's my story. For me, it's very important that people who work in mental health understands that even if religion is oppressive, it might be very important to a person so that they cannot feel like they can let it go. That there has to be a way to reconciliate somebody's faith tradition and who they are in the world. Because sometimes it's just something you cannot just throw away, even if it's hurting you. So that's my story. Any questions? I'll be happy to answer them.
Reverend Rhina, where are you located?
Forgot to say that. I'm in California, Northern California, very close to Oakland.
Thank you. Is there any other? Erica says, thank you for teaching and affirming people to be affirming. How's your family?
Oh, family is good, but they are all over the place. I have family in every state. No, but I do have a lot of family in Los Angeles in the East Coast too, and I out to see my family in the East Coast that remain there, because I was the one that moved to Northern California. I'm gonna see them pretty soon. So they're okay. They're okay. Thank you for asking.
How do they react to your identity?
How do they react to my identity? Well, you know what? During my teen years, I know it wasn't safe to come out. I know that my mom already suspected, and she would say things like, in my household, we will never have somebody who's weird. And I knew what weird was. And, but by the time I came out at 26, I was already a lawyer. I was already a professional. I could support myself. And I was divorcing. She was very supportive because she knew I needed her. And she said, you're my daughter. That's not going to change. Forever my daughter. And, you know, she had a time where it was hard for her, and she wanted to know if it was her fault, and if it was because she had cut my hair very short when I was a little girl, and I keep reassuring her that it wasn't the haircut, that it was beyond that, and that she had done a great job. And now she's a total P flag mom. And I'm like, where this woman came from? I mean, she totally is an ally and is always talking to people who's having a hard time with kids coming out. Yeah.
I'm glad that you have that support from your family.
I do. My family is super supportive.
For sure. Thank you so much for sharing your story with us and
Thank
spending
you.
your Saturday afternoon with us also. Your story is very inspirational and I really
So
appreciate
I have one. I have one
Somebody
question.
somebody says, how does culture in El Salvador feel about LGBTQ? So, one of the things I've been doing in the past 5 years is that I've been supporting the LGBTQ community in El Salvador, because they got so tired of being repressed, oppressed, forgotten, killed. They also resisted so much, and now there are so many organizations fighting for human rights for the LGBT community in El Salvador. And one of the things I've done is to take pastors to El Salvador to support the LGBTQ organizations that are fighting for the trans community, for everybody, but the trans community is very strong down in El Salvador. And we go and we support the organizations, and we get ourselves educated, because these tell us, why is it people fleeing? Because their lives are in danger. So it's still very hard. It's a very homophobic, transphobic society, because of what Jose was saying, because it's a traditional patriarchy, and machismo is so ingrained in the language and everything you do, who the authorities are. But people are fighting, and there are ways to fight along with them. Actually, El Salvador has one of the first ever trans clinics, hormone clinics, that is doing holistic approach to the trans community. It's incredible.
Thank you. I'm not getting any more questions over here again. Thank you, Reverend Rhina Ramos, for your time. We really appreciate you. And again, thank you for spending your Saturday with us. Oh, wait, we have another question. How does your homeland traditional people view LGBTQ?
Well, I cannot talk for the entire homeland, but a very good majority, because of their ingrained patriarchy, and because what they see are images that are very demonized of who a queer person is, and an LGBTQ person is. They don't see them in the good light. But that is changing, and it's changing so much that it's even changing in telenovelas, because I'm a telenovela junkie. I watch telenovelas in Univision or Telemundo. I don't know if you have those channels in Oklahoma, but you can find them in the internet. And those are the big networks of Latino television. And there is one soap opera that is bringing the coming out of a trans young person, en español and in Spanish. It's just amazing. And the parents are supportive, and they talking about how sexual orientation and gender identity are different. And they saying it in the language. It's beautiful. I mean, I already posted in my Facebook this morning, because the scene made me cry. I was like, oh my God, can't believe this is happening. If telenovelas are shifting, culture is shifting. Something is shifting.
Okay. Well, thank you for answering that last question. You enjoy the rest of
which telenovela? They want to know which telenovela. Okay. 100 días para enamorarse.
Can you put that in the?
I did. I just did. Yes, watch it. It's incredible.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for sharing your time.